Alright guys, welcome back to Underground Science, and in this video we're going to be talking about the lub-dub of the heart. Alright, let's put this in quotes because this isn't like purely scientific or anything, but the lub-dub, what I mean is when you really let's say you finish a set right at the gym, and you're just sitting quietly, or if you've ever listened through a stethoscope on another person's heart, you'll actually notice that you hear two sounds, right? You hear a lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. You hear two sounds, but then you start to wonder, why do I hear two sounds, right? I thought that the left ventricle pumps and that's what you feel. You just feel one heartbeat, but why is there two sounds? Well, those two sounds are actually your valves that are making the sounds. All right, we're just going to get into that. This is what we're going to talk about in this video. What are those two sounds and how do those two sounds occur? All right, and if you haven't already, I'll put a little card pop up to the right side of the screen to go watch my pulmonary circulation and systemic circulation videos, because those will really help in this video, understanding when the valves close and how the blood flows through the heart, and they'll help you understand how the valves are responsible for making those two lub-dub sounds. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so here we see a picture of the heart, and it's the same picture we've been using for the last, few videos. So let's start by discussing the first sound. All right, the lub. So we're going to call this the lub of the heart. Okay, so remember, you hear two sounds. You hear a lub dub, but this is going to be the lub of the heart. So the first sound. The first sound is actually your atrioventricular valves closing. All right, so let's write that down first, and then we'll explain how. So the first sound of your heartbeat is going to be your atrioventricular valves. Atrioventricular valves closing. All right, snapping shut. And if you guys remember from the pulmonary and systemic circulation videos, that the atrioventricular valves are your tricuspid valve and your mitral valve, right? So atrioventricular valves are your tricuspid and bicuspid valves, right? Bicuspid is also called your mitral valves. So you have one mitral valve and one tricuspid valve, and these two make up your atrioventricular valves because it's a valve that separates kind of your atria and the ventricles of the heart. So that's why it's called atrioventricular. And so what happens is when blood is sitting in your right ventricle and your left ventricle, right? So the blood that's sitting in your right ventricle is your deoxygenated blood ready to go to your lungs, and the blood that's sitting in your left ventricle is your oxygenated blood ready to go to your body. All right. So it's sitting there, and once electric signals come through the myocardium of the heart and tell the two ventricles to contract, what happens is this deoxygenated blood, the right ventricle pumps the deoxygenated blood through the pulmonic valve, and at the same exact time, your left ventricle also pumps your oxygenated blood through the aortic valve. All right. And when that happens, your atrioventricular valves, which again, remember, is this tricuspid valve and this bicuspid valve, the second both the right ventricle and the left ventricle pump and squeeze their blood, these two valves, these atrioventricular valves, they snap shut. All right, so to prevent backflow of blood, okay, because you don't want blood going from your ventricles back to your atria. All right, so these snap shut, and the snapping, or when these atrioventricular valves snap shut, that's the first sound. All right, so the first sound of your heart, the lub sound of your heart, is when the atrioventricular valves close. Okay, when they snap shut, you hear that first sound, and the sound right after it, immediately, the lub dub, the dub part is when your semilunar valves close and snap shut. All right, so what do I mean by that? So let's clear this page up so we can see a more clear version. So we just said that when the blood gets pumped through from the ventricles and into the pulmonic valve and into the aortic valve, right? Or not into, but through, we said that the atrioventricular valves snap shut, and that's the first sound, all right, the first lub sound of our heartbeat. Now the second sound we just said was the semilunar valves closing and snapping shut. All right, so semilunar, so it's also called the dub. You'll sometimes see that when you search it up. Dub. So the second sound is the semilunar. Oops, let's erase this dot. Semilunar valves snapping shut. All right, and just a reminder, right? A quick reminder: your semilunar valves are your pulmonic valve and your aortic valve. All right, so pulmonic and aortic valve are your semilunar valves of the heart. Okay, and when do these snap shut? Well, when the ventricles of the heart pump their blood into the aorta and pulmonary artery, right, from the left ventricle and right ventricle, we said that the atrioventricular valve snaps shut, right? But the second after, right, what happens is when the blood is pumped, right, successfully pumped without regurgitation, thanks to our atrioventricular valves, when it's successfully pumped and the blood reaches the pulmonary artery and the aorta, what's going to happen is, I'm just going to erase this for a second. What's going to happen is that now, instead of the atrioventricular valves snapping shut, these semilunar valves are going to snap shut now. Because now, since the blood is over here and over here, right, let me do that different color. Yeah, there you go. Here and here, we don't want blood flowing back, right, into the ventricles of the heart. Because we want blood going either to the lungs from the ventricles or to the rest of the body. All right, pulmonary circulation or systemic circulation. We don't want regurgitation, which is why the valves are there for. Okay, so that's pretty much it. That's when your semilunar valve snaps shut, right? When these snap shut, it will make your second sound of your heartbeat. All right, that's going to be the dub. All right, so let's go over what we just went through. All right, so let's do a review session real quick. All right, so let's scroll down right here. Let's erase this. And let's write what happens step by step real quick. All right, so first, let's talk about the lub of the heart, or the first sound of your heartbeat. All right, so the first sound of your heartbeat, we said, was your atrioventricular valves. Atrioventricular valves closing, all right, or snapping shut to prevent regurgitation from your ventricles to your atria. All right, we don't want that. So that's why the second that your ventricles pump their blood from, let me go ahead and erase this real quick. The second your ventricles pump their blood into the pulmonary artery and then into the aorta, right? Your left ventricle pumps it into the aorta and to the rest of the body, and your right ventricle pumps it into the pulmonary artery so it can go to your lungs. The second both ventricles pump, the atrioventricular valves, which is this tricuspid valve and this bicuspid valve, or the mitral valve, snap shut. Okay, and that when it snaps shut, when those atrioventricular valves snap shut, that is your lub sound. Okay, so we said when the ventricles of the heart, pump their blood, right? We said that the atrioventricular valves of the heart, which we know are the tricuspid valve and the bicuspid valve, they snap shut. All right, so snap shut. Oops, can't already snap shut and we're just going to say preventing any regurgitation of blood. Regurgitation of blood. All right, so that's your lub of the heart. Okay, and one thing I forgot to mention is that when your atrioventricular valves close, making that lub sound, that first sound, at that same instant in time, we have to make sure to state that at that same instant in time, your semilunar valves are open, all right? Because that's the only thing that makes sense, right? Because your atrioventricular valves close when your ventricles pump their blood. And remember, the ventricles are pumping their blood through the semilunar valves, so they have to be open, all right? So while the semilunar valves are open, your atrioventricular valves snap shut to prevent regurgitation, and that's your first sound of the heart, okay? And so now let's go on to the dub of the heart, or the second sound of the heart, I should say. All right, so let's do this in a different color. Let's go on to the dub of the heart. All right, so this is the second sound of the heart, and we said the valves responsible for the second sound of the heart were the semilunar valves. All right, we know that the semilunar valves are the aortic and pulmonic valves of the heart. Okay, so when the semilunar valves close, that is the second sound of the heart. Okay, and when does that happen? All right, so let's go ahead and erase the ventricles pumping and the activity of the atrioventricular valves closing, and let's talk about the semilunar valves closing. All right, so after the ventricles have successfully pumped their blood, right, to their desired locations, the right ventricle will pump it to the pulmonary artery, and the left ventricle will pump it into the aorta, into the rest of the body. After that happens, the tricuspid valve and the bicuspid valve, right, the atrioventricular valves of the heart, will open, and at the same time, the second all the blood has reached wherever it needs to go, right, to the pulmonary arteries and the aorta, the semilunar valves of the heart will immediately snap shut because, right, when the blood has reached here and here from the ventricles pumping, the semilunar valves will snap shut because we don't want blood going back. Okay, we don't want blood going back into the ventricles after it just did all that hard work and pumped the blood towards the aorta and artery, pulmonary artery. Okay, so again, the semilunar valves close to prevent regurgitation, and as they do close, that makes the second sound of the heart. Okay, so, and the reason why the atrioventricular valves open, right, as the semilunar valves close is because it has to constantly be filling with blood. Okay, so the reason why the atrioventricular valves open is so blood can go from the atria back to the ventricles, right? So the ventricles can fill with blood constantly. Okay, so let's go ahead and write that down and make it more clear to us. So we said that when the ventricles contract, their blood, right, the atrioventricular valves close to prevent regurgitation, and soon after, right, like immediately after, soon after that happens, the pulmonary or the pulmonic valve and the aortic valve snap shut, and then while the atrioventricular valves, scroll slow down, while the atrioventricular valves open up to let blood go from the atria to the ventricles, right, to let the ventricles fill with blood again. Well, the atrioventricular valves open up. All right, so again, when the pulmonic valve and the aortic valve snap shut, that makes the second sound of the heart. Okay, and while that happens, right, let me erase this again real quick, sorry about that. All right, so when the semilunar valve snaps shut, at the same time, the atrioventricular valves of the heart open up again. Remember to let blood flow from the atria to the ventricles to get ready to pump again. All right, and this is a cycle. It keeps on going. The atria contract their blood into the ventricles, then the ventricles fill with blood, right, increasing in preload, and then they contract, causing the atrioventricular valves to snap shut so it doesn't go back up into the atrias, or atria, because atria is plural. And then that makes the first lub sound of your heart. And the second the ventricles contract, once the blood reaches where it needs to be, which is at the moment in the aorta and pulmonary artery, the semilunar valve snaps shut so the blood doesn't flow back, right? And at the same time, right when the semilunar valve snaps shut, the atrioventricular valves open up again to let blood flow into the ventricles, right, which is diastole, and the cycle repeats itself. Okay, so now that I just mentioned it, let me mention it real quick. Kind of goes along with this. So I just said diastole. So when lub occurs, right? When lub occurs, we know that the ventricles just contracted. All right, we know that when lub occurs because remember, lub is when the atrioventricular valves close, and that happens because the ventricles contract. So whenever the ventricles contract, that will be called systole. All right. So whenever the ventricles contract, the atrioventricular valves close, making the lub sound, and this will be called systole. All right. The heart is in systole when the ventricles contract. This will be called systole. And maybe, just maybe, systole might be a familiar term to you guys when you go to the doctor and you check your blood pressure, or when the doctor checks your blood pressure, right? The top number is your systolic number, which is the pressure at which your left ventricle contracts, and your bottom number is the diastolic number, which is the pressure at which your ventricles relax and fill with blood, right? So actually, we'll just get to that right now. So we just finished saying that the lub of the heart is when your ventricles contract and your atrioventricular valves close, making the first sound of your heart. And when your ventricles contract, it's called systole. All right, now what's diastole? What does it mean when someone says your heart is in diastole? Well, diastole is when the time period between the dub and the next lub. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So remember, the lub is when the atrioventricular valves shut, all right? And then the dub is when your semilunar valves snap shut, right? And at that same time, your atrioventricular valves open up to let blood flow from your atria into your ventricles, all right? So remember, this is dub at this exact moment, when your atrioventricular valves are open and when your semilunar valves snap shut. At that instant and moment, at the instant in time, blood is flowing from your atria to your ventricles, and so this is called ventricular filling. Okay, ventricular filling. Okay, so your ventricles are filling with blood at this moment. All right, they're increasing in preload. All right, we'll talk about preload, contractility, and afterload in a future video. But as your ventricles are filling, it's getting ready to contract the next time. All right, when it gets ready to contract the next time, you're going to hear that lub sound again. All right, so that's why diastole is defined as the period in which your ventricles are filling with blood. All right, are filling with blood. And as your ventricles are filling with blood, this is when your ventricles are relaxed and are getting ready to pump again. All right, so this is the time period in between your dub of your last heartbeat and then between the starting of your lub, all right? So this is the time period from here to here is your diastole, all right? So this will be your diastole, okay? Because remember, again, when your ventricles contract, you hear that lub sound because of your atrioventricular valves closing and your pulmonic and your aortic valves opening, all right? And then soon after, your pulmonic and aortic valves close and your atrioventricular valves open. And when they open, when your atrioventricular valves open, right, blood flows from your atria to your ventricles. Your ventricles fill with blood and are about to make that lub sound again, right, when they contract, causing the atrioventricular valves to snap shut. So between that dub and the next lub, which is the relaxation phase of the ventricles, because they're filling with blood, because the atrioventricular valves are open at this moment, that is called diastole, that relaxation phase of your ventricles. All right. So that's pretty much it. That's the lub dub of your heart. That's what makes the two sounds of your heart that you hear. It's pretty interesting. Like, it's pretty fascinating once you know what exactly makes those two sounds. It's your valves making those two sounds. All right. And so stay tuned in my future videos. I'm going to be putting out videos about chemistry and more about biology and physiology, biochem, and soon or later, probably physics also. So thanks for watching, and I really hope to see you guys in my next video. All right, see ya.